All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Nicole Cantatori. I am the head of culture and engagement with Worth Ross Management Company, and I would like to welcome you all to our August speaker series. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. We are so happy to have you. So I will keep the introduction short because this is a highly anticipated topic. And I want to make sure that we have ample time for our presenter to actually present the presentation and answer any questions. So before we start the actual presentation, I did want to let everyone know that we are recording this session. And once the video is uploaded to our YouTube channel, I will send the link out along with access to the other webinars in the series. So the format for this evening is very similar to the previous events that we've had. The panelists will present the information and we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes after for Q&A at the end. So if there's any questions that you have or like to ask the speaker, please make sure that you send those via to me in the chat box. And then I will present them at the end during the Q&A. And there are some of you that were pre-questions, so I do have some of those, and I anticipate there'll probably be many more, but a lot of information will be covered. So without further ado, today's topic of discussion is Smart Charge Your Association, Best Practices for Affordable and Safe Electric Car Charging. And with me tonight is David Lederberg, Vice President with Smart Charge America. David, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Absolutely. Well, appreciate it. So again, my name's David Lederberg. I'm with Smart Charge America. And so maybe talk to get into the subject about who Smart Charge America is. So we've been in business since 2007. We're a company completely focused on car charging. It's all we do. We're not a subsidiary of, say, a larger company that just does this. No, we're from top to bottom. This is our focus. This is our passion too. We actually all drive electric vehicles as well, so we're very immersed in what we do as well. So we're made up of many master electricians throughout the country, in that we provide a scope of work to our customers that we actually back up with a longer warranty than you'll find really anywhere else on top of that. So, that's sort of our conviction to quality, consistency. Again, we do this across the United States, which covers all of Texas, as well as throughout the Denver area, Colorado. And we service all charger models. In addition, we pride ourselves on being actually very affordable for the value that we bring. And so to talk about what does that look like, what type of things that we work on, it can actually go across multiple solutions. So starting whether it's design and consultation, which is trying to figure out, evaluating electrical infrastructure, choosing the proper equipment, create a plan for implementation. We also do a full turnkey, which a lot of people like because it's kind of beginning to end, acquisition of products, installation, long-term service as well. A lot of people like that because it's, we're one kind of throat to choke, so to speak. So we're the ones that do it all and are in it for the long haul. We're not a company that installs it and says good luck with service, and we service what we install as well. So that, other than providing equipment, installation, activation, commissioning, we also do, the actual electrical work as well, which, we are certified master electricians. So when we design something and we, install it, we're all licensed, bonded, insured as well. And certainly when it comes to the EV charging equipment, we're partnered with all the top manufacturers of equipment. So, and that includes the software providers for the software on the stations, as well as the hardware manufacturers. In fact, we do a lot of service for a lot of the larger manufacturers out there. So we perform warranty service on their behalf. So that's kind of a little dive into that. But when it comes down to it, I'll just give an example of some of the charger manufacturers at the top of the screen now that I'm sharing. And that's just some of the ones that we work with, as well as the auto manufacturers. We work with a lot of auto manufacturers. In fact, we do a lot of installations for them, whether it's at dealerships or at manufacturing locations for them. We also have the testing, sometimes with vehicles. And then beyond that, certainly we have plenty of customers across the board, whether it's multifamily, just the tech industry, manufacturing, as well as, hospitality and beyond. So they're all people that we work with. So when it comes to EV chargers, why get them is a conversation that a couple of years ago would be a very common conversation that we'd have. Now these days, it's not a matter of why, it's how many. And the reason is all automakers at this point have committed to going full electric. And so that's literally even Rolls-Royce, I think, just recently came out with their plan to go all electric. So EV ownership is expected to more than double by the end of this year alone. And it's going to significantly increase. In fact, even as far as California will discontinue allowing the sale of internal combustion vehicles. That's how this ball is already rolling, and it's gaining momentum, and it's inevitable. So whereas a lot of people were questioning it a couple of years ago, now there's really no way to question it. This is where everyone's headed. It's only a matter of time, how quickly we'll get there. So in addition, just more visibility is coming every day, certainly in Texas now with Tesla manufacturing facility being put right here in Austin, Texas, where corporate headquarters is located here for us as well. We've seen EV awareness and adoption increase significantly as well, and it's only accelerating at this point. So when it comes to actually charging the electric vehicle, a lot of people ask, well, how and where do I charge it? Right, but I liken it to electric, vehicle charging to very common practice of just charging your your phone, your device you take everywhere with you, use it every day. And of course, you want to charge it, plug it in every day. You might top it off at the office maybe, but ultimately when you get home, you plug it in and then it's just there for you. You use it all day long, and that's majority of EV charging happens at home. It's as simple as that. You come home, you park, you plug in, and you set it and forget it. You move on with your evening and your night, and it's replenished by morning, and you're good to go for the day. So that is the use case that the majority of drivers are using, and also the most convenient because it's right there where you park your car. It makes it very simple. So on top of that, we're seeing how is this happening in the multifamily market, right? Because we're seeing that, of course, the adoption is increasing on the electric vehicle side. On the state law side, we're seeing them side with condo owners that they're actually allowing them, basically legal rights to get the opportunity to install their own charger. And so I've seen some people threaten legal action to be able to get the opportunity to do this. I've seen some HOAs push back in the past, and it doesn't work out well for them. So the reality is the right to be able to charge essentially has precedence, where it allows those individuals to get chargers installed, and the HOA condo, they must comply. They must allow this. And this is just a couple examples on the screen that are out there. There are new ones popping up all the time, but the reality is even without these laws, currently, they have a precedent to refer to, as some of the lawyers I've spoken to in the past have advised me, so that if someone wants to get it, they can compel the actual HOA to make that an option for them. So when it comes to chargers, though, you might have done research on this. You've seen there's level 1, which is effectively on the left side of the screen. That amounts to a regular household outlet. It's very slow. It's not really a charging solution. It's more of what I call the trickle charge. And then you have level 2 in the center, which is the most common and certainly the best for a multi-family housing environment. So this allows anywhere from 16 to 25 miles of range can be recovered for every hour the vehicle's plugged in and charging. So when you look at the average daily actual mileage covered by the typical driver, it's about 50 miles, give or take, even upwards of 100 miles. You can imagine if you get home in the evening, say 5 or 6 p.m. and plug in, of course, you're going to be at your place, sleep at least 6 to 8 hours, let's say. That's more than enough time to recover the daily driving that you do. And so we find that to be the sweet spot for a multifamily charging environment. There is DC fast charging on the right, but that's really more for the long range driving is the reality. So if you're doing a long range drive from state to state beyond, that's where DC fast charging comes in. It's really not necessary. And it's incredibly expensive compared to level 2. So it really doesn't have a place in a multifamily property. So for that reason, that's where our focus is level 2 for when it comes to multifamily. So there are unique challenges though when it comes to adding chargers in a multifamily property, because parking spaces are typically they're in a common area. Even if parking is assigned, deeded, let's say, it is require common owned area to get to it. So that means that also the electricity source is located in that common area. So it's not necessarily next to a driver's personal electric panel. So that means that if electrical infrastructure needs to be installed or circuit needs to be installed, it will be traversing through HOA and common area property. So that is a unique challenge in that respect. And also, when it comes to that electrical panel that we're often pulling power from, the HOA is paying for that common area electricity. So that's a consideration. And when you have that electricity, it's also a limited capacity, meaning that it only has but so many chargers that can be installed. You have a limitation on capacity, therefore it's a finite resource that needs to be managed appropriately but also equitably, because everyone should have that opportunity to charge their car. So when it comes down to how essential this is, EV drivers, what I'm seeing now, they simply will not look at a property if they don't either have or allow electric car charging. It's as simple as that. So whether you have an electric vehicle or not, your property value is being affected by whether or not that is an option at your location. So that's something that ultimately this option will affect every single property owner in a multifamily environment, whether you have that EV or not. And so it's something that really can't avoid it. And it's something, again, I'm seeing where the fact that it's affecting sales or property value, you won't even know because they won't even check out the property. I deal with a lot of realtors, for instance, where they are representing a buyer and they want me to go in there and figure out if they can get a charger installed and whether or not that's possible. And if it's not, then they rescind their offer. It's as simple as that. And so that's, again, that is affecting property values, and it's a very real consideration, whether, again, the board or others have an electric vehicle or not. So when it comes to solutions out there, there are a number of ones I've seen over the years. Most of them are non-networked out there that just don't scale. That means that you can't measure usage. If you can't measure it, you can't bill it, you can't share it, you can't, if you don't have that visibility of tracking it, you can't manage it. So what you can't measure, you can't manage. Common saying out there. Oftentimes too, they're very slow, messy, potentially unsafe, with long extension cords in some cases I've seen. So it's just not scalable at all. But you might look at conduit being run to individual unit meters. So you can see on the bottom left, I've got a meter bank, which not uncommon. So each individual owner has their own meter, but the reality is that it's often too far or it's inaccessible to the parking area. And on top of that, it has limitations that are really bound by National Electric Code. I can't put an unlimited number of conduits on the wall that are going to these meter banks like you're seeing on the left. So it's not scalable, and it won't be up to code ultimately. So for that reason, that's why you need a better way to do this. So when you're designing a program, it's really important to have certain considerations in mind and also have consistency and equity in mind. So does that mean, do you want to have perhaps community chargers, meaning that you have maybe a couple publicly available chargers on common area parking or guest parking area that allows each individual condo owner to have access to charging from that perspective? Or maybe it's individual chargers only, which might end up costing a little bit more per person, but allows individuals to have their own option and it's up to them, right? So or you could have both, but on top of that, it's about setting a fee. So that's making sure that the amount of electricity that's dispensed to an individual's vehicle, that individual is paying for that electricity that they used. And so that can certainly, different rate schedules with utilities can influence that, whether the time of use rates might be employed in that situation. So having the ability to set a fee based on that time of use rate, or perhaps demand charges being taken into consideration as well, something important, because again, you don't want people, the whole HOA, to have to pay for electricity usage on certain individuals that want to charge their car. It should be that what they use is what they pay for on the individual side. So in addition, when you're looking at community chargers, do you want to allow users to be notified? If you're on a high rise, you're on, say, the 30th or 40th floor, you don't want to have to go down every 20, 30 minutes to the garage to figure out if a charger is available or not. That's just not sustainable. It's not convenient. And that's why, having a connected solution, for instance, is very important. It might seem simple to not do that or more cost effective, but ultimately the user experience could be seriously compromised and potentially just not usable at all. So being able to have that communication is very important. So scalable charging policies, talked about that, that's key. So it needs to be a plan for all, not just the first few. I've seen too many times in HOA, maybe, we're talking to people 3, 4, 5 years ago, they would just, the one person that came to them, the first person ever to ask for electric car charger, allow them to basically do whatever they want. They took electrical capacity that was finite, or maybe the last amount of it. They, were basically not paying for the electricity usage. It doesn't scale. It's really important to do this right from the beginning, because undoing maybe some previous policies is very sticky, very challenging, and often very expensive. And so you want it to be equitable. So charging for actual usage is very important. Sometimes people want to just placate with a flat monthly fee. That doesn't work. Some people will get overcharged, and also feeling like others are paying too little, and they're probably right. So this is so hard to change once a station is installed, because oftentimes you can't go back. If someone's already invested in an individual charger that doesn't comply with a newer policy, that can really have a lot of resentment, is what I've seen, at least among others that come later. Being able to optimize access to the main electrical infrastructure is very important too. Just depending on the size of the garage and where the electrical infrastructure is located, so it could be a situation where some people are very far away from that infrastructure. Excuse me. So they will end up having to pay essentially a lot more money in order to install a circuit back to that electrical infrastructure from their assigned spot. So if that's the case, you might have people that are very close to it. And so just depending on that setup, having centrally located electrical panels that are dedicated to electric vehicle charging can make all the difference there. It can make it absolutely accessible and affordable for everyone. So, and on top of that, being aware of how much electrical capacity is available, because as I mentioned before, it's finite. When you run out, you run out. That's it. You can get more, but honestly, the amount of cost and complexity of something like that can be insurmountable in some cases. It can be very sticky. It honestly is rarely necessary to do something like that. So, it's about managing the available electrical capacity in an equitable way, in an efficient way, and allows you to significantly lower and actually make it so you do not have to do an expensive electrical service upgrade. Because like I mentioned, this can be cost prohibitive very quickly. So the real solution out there is a cloud network charger. It means that it's using common power that's close to the parking, because it has driver authentication, for instance. So in other words, if you had a charger at an individual spot, for instance, that someone else isn't even going to be able to use it because it requires an authentication. So it's access controlled. In addition, that could be a public charger. So it only allows, say, maybe it's a more open parking area. You only want certain people to have access. You can do that, but it does require network connectivity in order to keep that up to date and to, authenticate that in real time. It measures electricity usage as well, having that ability. And then again, the key portion of where individual users pay for the electricity that they actually use. In addition, that has energy management built in. So that has that ability to intelligently manage the available capacity to maximize the number of chargers that can be installed. So, and I want to go into more detail with this, because this is often misunderstood and often mismarketed, and it's very easy to misconstrue what this means. So having a built-in sub-meter inside the charger itself will, first of all, of course, allow that to bill the drivers directly, but also makes it so it takes that off the the table of the management, because having to go to, say, in everyone's individual meter on a monthly basis and manage that and to track that and to bill that individually is very time consuming. And either way, one way or another, if that's time is being spent on that, then ultimately everyone's paying for it if management has to take on that task. And that's why it's so important to have this built in to the solution, because the design is that it takes care of that automatically. It automatically tracks it, it reports it. So it's clearly reported on both the HOA side as well as the individual. So there's complete transparency. And then within that, on a monthly basis, they're billed and charged for that actual usage. So it's about intelligently managing the energy consumption, also making sure power is available to those that actually need it. When it comes to National Electric Code, it has very specific requirements when it comes to car charging. If you ever want to do any research, National Electric Code Article 625, I don't recommend you read it, but it has a lot of very unique requirements in there that make car charging unlike any other electrical circuit inside any building. So when it comes down to it, it really requires dedicated electrical capacity, meaning whereas, for instance, you could have a bunch of regular household outlets all on the same circuit. It's all sharing, and you can have a dryer here and a toaster there, and they're all sharing that same circuit. With car charging, you cannot do that, right? Without special, software otherwise. It effectively very much limits the number of chargers you can install given a finite amount of electrical capacity. So, but there are ways to get around that. Mainly what I'm talking about is that energy management, where imagine if you have, say, a panel dedicated to car charging. If you have 15 chargers coming out of it, the chances of all 15 chargers being plugged in simultaneously is low. And then on top of that, even if it were all 15 plugged in, how many of those are actively charging simultaneously is even much lower, significantly lower. So rather than having all that electrical infrastructure dedicated to those 15 chargers that are rarely ever all plugged in and rarely all actively charging simultaneously, instead you can intelligently manage it so you can actually effectively get 4 to 1. So if, say I have 10 chargers in a panel, it's the maximum I can have. Now I can have 40 in that same panel and still have a very high quality, high speed charging experience by actively managing that electricity in real time, which is also fully up to code, fully safe, and it actually allows much greater scalability, unlike really any other way to do it. So it's knowing how many can you add today, how many can you add in the future, having that in mind, because again, these are finite answers. These answers exist for every single one of the properties that are being represented on this call. And if you don't know what that is, that's what you need to understand. So, when we look at this for individual charging, I want to give an example though of what that looks like. So if someone wanted their own individual charger, this is just one example with ChargePoint, one of the largest, US manufacturers out there of chargers. And it's called the CPF 50. You can see at the bottom left, it's $2,000, give or take roughly. And there's some options there, but ultimately it's $20 a month that covers all the tracking of electricity usage, network functionality. So all the network and internet connectivity, that's all done via cellular. So it doesn't require the HOA to provide internet or separate connectivity or Wi-Fi. So it's all integrated into the solution. And again, it's where the driver pays for their fair share of what they're using. It's an important part of this. It's used by one driver. It's dedicated. It really includes everything you need. It also has worry-free equipment warranty, includes labor, parts, service. So it just handles everything, and it also has 24/7 customer support. So when it comes to kind of taking that burden off management, it absolutely does that. And it makes it very simple for making sure people are very fairly paying for the electricity usage that they actually utilize, and making sure, again, it takes that burden off management, takes it off the cost burden off the HOA, and puts it on the individual driver that actually utilizes this technology and utilizes that electricity. So it's actually a very good solution, and actually has built-in energy management as well. And so having all the chargers be, this one company allows that to happen, and it happens in real time. So it's really seamless from the end user standpoint, as well as the HOA and management. So as far as an example for community charging, here's again, same manufacturer, different model that's specifically designed for more of a public or shared charging experience. So this is often used for valet or guest parking, mixed use areas. You've probably seen these potentially around town already. We certainly install quite a few of them. Basically take turns charging. So obviously, if you have parking available to do something like this, this can be a good option. Sometimes I see people do both community chargers like this shared, as well as individual chargers as an option. So maybe those that don't want to, invest the money to install a charger, or don't find it affordable for whatever reason, then they have this as a shared charging option. So it's either or. And so that's, a lot of people like that. It does require the property to pay a yearly fee to have the access for the network connectivity, billing reimbursement, and it's again still people, the individuals that use the charger will individually pay for the electricity that they utilize. So it still has that same attribute. The only thing that's shared cost there is, of course, the installation and acquiring of the charger, along with the property paying for the annual plan. But ultimately, the electricity usage and the rate at which you set for electricity usage can offset that cost. But either way, this is something that would be a shared cost from the beginning because it is a community-based charger. So this is just, again, another example of another way to approach offering charging amenity to users. And then, it comes down to robust access for the individual. So having simple to be able to find a station if you want, navigate to it, and also just a simple tap to charge. I think that's something that makes it very easy. You can use an RFID card on your key fob, for instance, or you can just actually just swipe your phone in front of the charger and you can begin charging your car that way. So again, that's how it knows that you specifically are charging. It charges your account for the electric usage that the car uses. And so, it's equitable. It gives real-time access to know if someone is using a charger or not. So again, that's that scenario where if I'm on the 30th floor, I want to know if that charger is available or not. I don't want to have to go down the elevator to go check. This is a way to do that, to have that functionality, that visibility. When it comes to the central, condo management control, it has the goal of this network side of the charging, the software, it has a web portal. So this allows the HOA and management to have a central spot to be able to manage, monitor all the chargers that are at the property, both whether they're shared chargers or individual. So setting pricing policies, because pricing can change over time. Utility rate plans could be changed midstream. And this will allow you to set that pricing policy on a real-time basis. So it can update based on that, change in billing. So you can, different features, functionality can be tracked. You can track electricity usage relative, for environmental impact tracking, and also get notifications if there's any maintenance or connectivity issue. Should that arise, it gives you visibility into that on a central basis. So it's a kind of single pane of glass to manage all charging. So how do I get started is often a question we hear. So we have a simple 5-step implementation process because there's a lot of questions to ask in the beginning. So we often do a consultation meeting where it's really understanding how many chargers does HOA envision as far as a need, what is the current need, what's the existing need that's already been filled, and as far as the long-term plan, how much need do they want to be able to fulfill long-term. So that being able to do that, have that meeting, and then we do basically a consultation contract where we work directly with the HOA and management to actually get an engineer involved. We can get pricing out to them depending on what those goals are. We've done this with a number of properties. Certainly whether it's high rise or larger, multi-building properties, we're no exception. We really have dealt with them all at this point. And we've worked through to make sure whether it's electrical infrastructure, engineering costs, evaluations of the electric capacity existing, that's all part of this process. And then if necessary, we also can work with an engineer either on your behalf or have you connect you with an engineer that actually knows car charging, which is very important. There's a lot of very good engineers out there, but if they don't understand the car chargers or the needs of car charging in this type of multifamily environment, I often find that the results they give as far as electrical plans show that it's reflected and that it's not well designed for the current needs and or future needs. And so there are a number of engineers who work with on a regular basis that they understand it and they really get what's needed and what's necessary. And they can work with us hand in hand as well to make sure that it's done correctly. So, when infrastructure is needed, that's where the engineer can, write out plans if necessary. And it also allows us to, bid the electrical plans and we can install the infrastructure, which is often what we end up doing to make that easier. So we handle everything from the infrastructure. So whether it's step down transformers, additional EV dedicated panels for make it, easy access to all the parking spots, all the way to actual installation of the chargers. So when we get all that infrastructure installed, working, fully functioning, permitted, inspected, now we can start getting chargers. And typically, just give an example of installation of chargers where step 5, you can see the total cost of, say, a condo owner with an individual charger usually averages anywhere from about $4,000 to $8,000. And obviously that it depends, really the number one factor there in that range. You might ask, why is this such a long range? It's because it's really how close proximity their parking location is to the power source. Closer it is, the less labor and less materials. Certainly, a lot of people have seen in the last couple of years that commodity prices have been impacted by, a lot of the churn going on, and that is, really we've been no exception to that when it comes to aluminum, copper, steel. That has absolutely affected our costs, and we ultimately that affects the price that we charge customers accordingly. But when it comes to this, closer the better, and that's why having common area infrastructure that's accessible is so important. Otherwise, it really leads to a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths if they can't quite get what they want, what they're looking to accomplish. So again, 48,000 could be more, could be less potentially, but ultimately that's the typical we see, and it's the best expectation we often set with the individuals wanting to get one installed in their spot. So I want to talk about the design a little, because a lot of people don't really envision what does this look like or what the end result can be. I kind of liken it to a hub and spoke model. So the hub is the common EV dedicated infrastructure. It's often paid up front by the HOA and the condo board. And then what they do is every time someone wants to access that power and add their own charger, they will have that individual pay, say, example, $1,000 towards this kind of EV fund, which will help cover the cost of the initial infrastructure that was installed, that of course certainly these individuals are taking advantage of, which is great, but it also helps cover that upfront cost over time, in addition to long-term upgrades, maintenance, growth. So making sure everyone pays their fair shares, because ultimately, oftentimes there is initial infrastructure that needs to be installed that is shared by everyone, but over time you'll find that the EV drivers will gladly pay their fair share that ultimately will cover the cost of that initial infrastructure, which I find works best in a lot of cases. And then so we'll set up a central panel outside of the electrical room, which is much more scalable, and make it easier, more accessible to the actual parking location. And then we come back to the spokes, where the individual owner of the electric vehicle will pay to have conduit wiring and the charger to their own deeded parking spot. So that's paid for, that again, by the individual EV driver, not by the HOA. That's the most common scenario we come across, and find that people find more equitable as far as who pays for what and who's responsible for what part of this infrastructure. So I want to give an example of some installations that we've done. This is basically the same charger I was talking about earlier, that individual charger, CPF50. These are a deeded parking situation, and we installed chargers at these spots. So they're easily accessible, conveniently located as well, and using shared common infrastructure that basically they paid to have installed via the HOA. So there's also kind of bring your attention to the communication gateway, which I alluded to as far as the network communications is all cellular, so it's all dedicated. So ultimately, it's the individual that's paying for that network connectivity, but that is the functionality, that connectivity that allows the intelligent energy management, the billing on a real monthly basis, to make sure, again, they're paying for their fair share as well. And so that's kind of the key there as well, that it's individuals pay for their usage as well as including that networking and communication side. So now that I've kind of gone through all the details, I wanted to get into the question side. So Nicole, you can kick that off.
Absolutely. And believe me, there are lots of questions. So you've kind of gone through a lot of this information. So forgive me, because I know that I don't understand, I'm not so savvy with EV charging, lingo. But so one of the first questions, we'll pick an easy one first. So a couple of questions came in about this. So is there specific cities or states that that have the federal rebates? Actually, they wanted to know about Texas first. So are you aware of any type of rebates or grant money available in Texas?
So currently there is some money available, but it's really for shared commercial charging properties. It's not for individuals at the moment. So there's a grant application and an application process. But right now the NEVI funds, which is commonly called, the state of Texas applied for the several $billion that came down from an executive order from the federal government. So a lot of that money is for common kind of DC fast charging infrastructure, but the state also has a plan for that to be extended to multifamily. The reality is it's really more for lower income and disadvantaged communities. And at least last I checked, Worth Ross doesn't usually cater to those communities that would specifically qualify for those types of designations. So there really isn't much available other than the tax credit, which was recently reinstated. So for an individual to install a charger at, in this case, an individual charger, that is tax credit available, assuming you qualify. And that's something you definitely want to talk to your tax professional about.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, the next question. Do you have experience in setting up power sharing with Tesla Gen 3 chargers?
Yeah, that's actually something that I do quite a bit. In fact, I work directly with a Tesla commercial charging team at headquarters. So I do a lot of residential installs for Tesla as well as commercial. In fact, we're doing a lot of installs all over the country for them at the moment. And the energy management is very specific. It does do certain capabilities. It doesn't do all the capabilities that I mentioned in the presentation, just because there are some functionality that it currently does not have. So it's definitely a very good solution. It's not full featured, but it's also getting better all the time. So, but yes, I am very familiar with it.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question is regarding payment by user's card and or phone app. And hopefully you have the answer to this question. So regarding the recovery of the infrastructure cost to HOAs, can you talk a little bit more about that so I can better understand that process?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a high-rise condo we work with in downtown Austin, Texas. So this is a situation where the HOA fronted the bill for about a little over $60,000 in infrastructure. So that involved multiple transformers, it involved multiple panels across 6 or so different parking levels in a high-rise. So they wanted equitable access, so they needed multiple panels. We worked with the engineering to get plans created. And with that $60,000, the HOA basically fronted that bill. And then now at this point, as individuals are adding their own charger or applying effectively to get their own charger installed, that first step is basically to qualify is to put a $1,000 payment back to the HOA to just have the opportunity to install a charger, which then in excess of that, beyond that, they have to get, in this case, Smart Charge America to come out and install the charger and install the electrical circuit back to that shared panel. So that's on top of the $1,000. But ultimately that $1,000 is already, I think about 15,000 of it has already been paid through those funds, which is again going to reimburse the HOA eventually. And then in addition, it's going to also fund future growth. Because after you get to a point, you can only handle but so many. We cover about 40% of the parking spots. You can imagine, of course, that's going to increase. Eventually, they know that, and that's why this is good, because we know by the time we fill all that infrastructure, they'll have the money they need to grow further as well. So they really were very methodical about how they plan that and made it so ultimately, the people that utilize the infrastructure are the ones paying for it. It will take time to reimburse it, but ultimately, I found it to be the most equitable solution.
Excellent, thank you so much. And still talking about charging, asking if you could please discuss a little bit further regarding demand charges, subscription fees, and time of day charging.
Yeah, so these are all specific to utility bills, right? So every utility is different. So depending on whether it's a municipal owned utility, it could be a deregulated area part of Texas utility, and certainly, in Colorado as well. They have very specific, whether it's Excel and a couple other providers out there. Some cases you have a choice on who your utility provider is. In some cases you do not. So, but more often than not, they do have options on the utility plan. And what that can entail is specific time of use rates, meaning that if you were to basically incentivize people to charge their vehicles at night, which most people are going to do anyways, they get home from work, they plug their car in, and you can set it up in a way that it incentivizes those people to charge at, say, starting at 9 p.m. And that works well because the HOA pays the lowest electric rates at 9 p.m., between 9 p.m. and say 3 a.m. So you can also incentivize individual EV owners to charge during that time. And ultimately, that's a lower cost for the HOA, but also lower cost for the individual. But in addition to that, why does that matter? It's because of demand charges. So if you're not familiar with demand charges, what that is basically above a specific threshold set by the HOA, they look at the highest amount of electric usage within a given 15-minute period within a billing cycle. So basically they say if you're using, in this case, arbitrary number, 200 kilowatts during that time, that's not important that it's 200, but the point is 200, it's a high number, let's say. And basically they will charge additional on your electric bill based on that high usage during that a certain period of time. And that can increase the overall electric bill for the HOA. Could car charging be a cause of those demand charges? Yeah, it's possible. But what we do find is that a majority of demand charges usually come during the day when it's the hottest. There's more ACs running than anything else. Either that, or in some cases, if it's a newer building, I can think of one in here in downtown Austin that they specifically get the highest demand charges right around 4 a.m. in the winter because they're all running resistive heat. That's all electrical, and it's the coldest right before dawn. And so that's when heat is having to work the hardest to use the most electricity. But what they can do is, again, control demand charges and or also pass that along to the individuals. And I think it's one of those things that you can plan for only but so much. What we can do is adjust the reimbursement rates on the electric side to make sure if it is affecting demand charges, which is kind of difficult to measure. Just in general, it's not unique to car charging. It's difficult in general as well. But if you have Johnson Controls or some other electric management tracking software already installed in your property, it's a good chance you already have this data and you already have this information, and can also be pulled from your electric bill as well. They give you a certain amount of flexibility to actually see that information, which I can help with in certain instances. But ultimately, it's a utility tracked and managed aspect of the bill. And I think the most important part is just make sure if that is affecting demand charges, just simply increase the rate at which people pay for electricity to charge their car to offset that additional cost. So they're paying their fair share.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Okay, the next question. So, and this is actually a common question that's come up, so I'm glad we're able to answer it one time. So the issue is that the personal garages run on common electricity. So we have been told that there is not enough electricity coming from the provider on the property. Can you speak a little bit more about possible options?
Yeah, so if you're really confident there's not enough electricity, that would mean that you either already had an engineer do what's called a load study, meaning they had very specific specialized equipment installed at your property for 30 days or more. If that didn't happen, you looked at your last 12 months of electric bills and you were looking at the demand charges that were applied during the last rolling 12 months. That would tell you, relative to your electric service, whether or not you're truly don't have any available capacity. So unless you've done one of those two things or both, you don't know that's the answer. So it could also be that it's just too far away. At a certain point, sometimes electricity just, no one was thinking about this, but it just happens to be incredibly far away from the parking area, right? They designed the building at a time maybe where there's the thought of having high voltage or a lot of electric capacity in the garage area just wasn't part of their plans now or in the future, right? So that just happens. So that means that there has to be a certain amount of electrical infrastructure that's added to get that electricity where it wants to be used now, which is in the garage. So there's always a way. That's the reality of it. So if it's a service upgrade, that would be the true extreme situation where if it's an older property, honestly, very much older property, this would typically apply to, where there is a finite amount of capacity, of course, it's true. But there's also probably a very old infrastructure at that property, which probably needs to be upgraded anyways. This electrical infrastructure, the panels, switchboards, and gear, that doesn't last forever. It needs to be maintained and monitored and constantly done regular maintenance on it. If that hasn't been done, then again, it's more reason that it does need to be addressed anyways. So I find with these older properties that I have to go through that gyration where there are really ones that were not maintained, and we get an engineer involved, number one, to make sure it's safe and there's no issues with adding additional load, to make sure that the existing infrastructure can handle it. But if we do need to do an actual upgrade, that would involve an engineer working with the utility as well, and often digging up a lot of sidewalk, a lot of utility holes. It's a very intensive process, but honestly, I've never had to do that. It's usually a situation where there's a way to do it, and most importantly is having that energy management that I mentioned earlier. Is being able to intelligently manage the available capacity, because it's never a situation where all the power that's available to a building is being utilized all the time. There's always a point at which it's available, and or varying degrees being available. If you intelligently manage that and allow charging to occur when it is available, which is often at night, that it is possible to allow people to charge utilizing existing infrastructure. So I'm not convinced it's the lost cause, but for those reasons, like I mentioned, that would be help us determine whether or not you're all tapped out.
Actually, that takes us into this next question. Thank you for so eloquently explaining that, but they wanted to know what would be the best cost-effective practice to determine if an older building is capable to support EV charging. Now, you've talked about it, but they want to know best cost-effective.
So to determine if EV charging can be done at an old property, the simplest is to know the amount of electrical capacity available. Like I mentioned, that's the simplest way is just look at your last 12 months of electric bills. It has the demand data on those bills most often. It's not every case, but it's very rare I come across where it doesn't have that data. And so if usually, worst case, they have to go to the utility to ask for that information. And once you do that, you might need to get an engineer involved in a situation like that. But at the very simplest, it's sending me those last 12 months of electric bills. You can analyze it and see whether or not that tells you very quickly whether or not you have available electric capacity. And that coincides with National Electric Code. They have a specific part of National Electric Code that tells me, an electrician or an engineer, how to evaluate available electric capacity. And that's why they're all connected, basically. So that's the simplest, cheapest way to get started. And that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you so much. This is another question that's come up. Actually, we had this asked 5 times. How does one, and I'm not sure if you have the full information on this, but how does one put out an EV battery fire?
Yeah, so EV battery fire, let's talk about that. So EV battery fires are actually less common than basically like what I call legacy fueled vehicles at this point, any gasoline vehicle, which I mean, the reality is that a tank of gasoline is incredibly flammable. It's poisonous. And it's very challenging to put a gasoline fire out, if not more challenging than a battery fire. So, the incidence of battery fires on electric vehicles is incredibly low, and it's much lower than, again, gasoline vehicles. So beyond that, I mean, that's why we have fire departments that are specifically trained in extinguishing these types of fires. But even then, the manufacturers of these batteries, what basically the concern there is that if a fire starts in an electric vehicle battery, that it can have what's called thermal runaway, which is not unlike a tank of gasoline catching on fire, except for that can explode. The EV battery fire starts to let out energy, and so, but ultimately it gets very hot. Excuse me, it gets very hot. And that's why the fire departments are specifically trained with very, unique, basically fire retardant devices and foam. And I know they use a variety of ways to extinguish those fires, but it would be very similar to how they'd extinguish a gas vehicle fire, which again are honestly far more common than a battery fire. So it's unlikely to be an issue. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay, wonderful. So we have 7 more questions that have come in. So first one, it sounded like each vehicle owner paid for their own charging. So why would we need to charge rates at the management console?
Yeah, so because again, when individuals have a charger installed, it's 99% of the time it's coming from a shared common power source, meaning that electricity that the charger is pulling from is actually paid, that bill goes to the HOA. So the HOA is paying that bill and it starts to double in price. Certainly, you're not going to expect, HOA rates to go up and everyone to start paying a higher, condo owner's fee. That doesn't make sense, right? So the individuals that are charging their vehicles, they're using a certain amount of electricity. Some are using more, some are using less. That's why the importance of tracking that individually and making sure those individuals that do use that power to actually pay for the power they use. And that's why that's important. I mentioned that. So it's more fair.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Okay, next question. Why not use smart breaker panels that manage load and energy distribution through smart solid state breakers or technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's a very kind of a relatively basic way. So certainly this kind of what's called load shedding, or it's commonly called, certainly solid state breakers have certain energy management capabilities, energy tracking capabilities. But the thing is that capability is either on or off. It means the breaker will turn off that means the car will stop charging entirely, which is a very poor charging experience. So that means that a bunch of people could wake up and their cars will not be charged. That's the implication there. But the type of smart energy management solution I'm talking about is integrated with a charger. So what that means is that rather than stopping the charging session of the car entirely, which is what those other solutions would do, this would simply lower the charging rate at and actually very specific intervals. So it just say I'm charging at 32 amps, it might decrease it to 28 amps or just 26 amps. So it slows it down slightly. So if that say 20 people are charging and it's at the very max of what's available, that 21st person plugs in, all those existing 20 people go down by about 2 amps. That's it. And then that 21st person can start charging at the same speed as everyone else. So it's equitable. It provides a much higher quality of charging, and it makes more sense. Everyone can get their fair share of charging as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next question. What about fire suppression systems for electric vehicles? Aren't they required?
So when it comes to National Fire Protection Agency, it's NFPA, and within the National Fire Protection Agency code, there is the National Electric Code. So that's the most important part that we pay attention to. But when it comes to fire suppression and fire protection, that's something that's actually very well documented, very well mandated when it comes to commercial construction in many different ways. So that includes having sprinkler control systems, fire control that are required per code. If you have a very old building that doesn't have that, which is possible, that'd be a totally different discussion, and I wouldn't consider EVs to be the reason or the sole purpose to install something like that. When it comes to property safety of everyone there, as well as everyone's what everyone has inside their apartment, the key part is to have a proper fire suppression and protection system installed. But there's no specific special type that would need to be employed when it comes to electric vehicles. Because again, it's mainly to get people out of the building, get them safe, try to put out any smoke, right? And ultimately, the fire department comes and they do their job. These are all very short-term mitigation functionalities of what most modern fire suppression systems are, that are designed to get people out of the building safely, and then the actual firefighters can go do their job.
Great. Thank you so much. The next question. So if an association signs up with Smart Charge America, how long is the wait time before the install is ready for use?
Yeah, so the wait time before the installation is ready for use, so it can vary. So sometimes, first of all, we need approval to get the charger purchased, and then also lead times on chargers right now are actually kind of out there. So when it comes to raw materials, certainly a lot of manufacturers are feeling the brunt of that, of availability of raw materials, chip, different silicon chips are hard to get a hold of. And that is affecting supply chain for us when it comes to chargers. So in some cases, it's 4 to 8 weeks from the point I actually receive an order to when I order it and actually can receive the charger. So more often than not, yeah, it could be several months from when they order it to when I can actually install it. When it comes to electrical infrastructure, electrical panels, transformers, in some cases, that can be as many as 4 to 6 months out or even beyond, just depending on what the plan is. But what I've been able to do is I actually effectively stockpiling the specific types of panel boards and transformers, which we most commonly install, and also that I work with my engineers to actually design their electrical plans to basically have materials in them that are commonly available or I already know that I have available. So we're not in a situation where we're waiting a year to install infrastructure or chargers, which some people are. They're having to do that, but I do it in a way to make sure that that's not the case.
Okay. Thank you so much. I know you spoke about this a little bit, but I guess there still wants to be a little bit of clarity. So they're asking, can you discuss dynamic load management versus time of day restriction in terms of the end user experience and demand charges? Basically, essentially real-time throttling of power versus the time of day charging restrictions.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, obviously there's a finite amount of electrical capacity available, right? So that's one aspect for the energy management to manage on a real-time basis. Beyond that, it has basically to have the additional input of demand charges. So in other words, if a system sees that demand charges are about to be employed for a given billing cycle, it can lower EV charging to avoid having to basically avoid additional demand charges. So that's pretty important, and that can significantly lower costs for individuals. It can also, ultimately what it means is it'll slow the charging rates as well. So that's just what I find is most higher end properties, the individuals, instead of having a lower or slower charging experience, they'd rather just pay for the demand charges. That's the reality of what I've seen. So the fact that some people are very afraid of demand charges, first of all, I think it's unlikely that car chargers will be the source of those demand charges, because the way that demand charges work is you hit it, whatever the highest amount of demand you pull in a given 15-minute period within a billing cycle, right? So that one time, maybe it's just that one morning where at 5 a.m. right before the sun comes up, that's when the most electrical demand is happening, which may or may not, it really might not be at all because of car charging. If car charging is always right below that for the rest of the billing cycle, then it'll never employ additional demand charges. So it's kind of tricky the way the utilities do that, and it's often misunderstood. But ultimately, the implications mean a slower charging experience is what that can amount to. So what I find is most users are, hey, I paid $4,000 to $8,000 to have a charger. I paid $1,000 to go to the HOA fund to fund all this infrastructure that I'm utilizing, and now I can't have the full charging experience. I find that most people that are at that point are unwilling, and they're effectively willing to pay more per electricity used to cover those demand charges. And that's what I find most people are in that state of mind, and it makes sense.
Awesome. I'm not sure if you can even give a ballpark on this question, but we'll see what you say. So is there a general cost for the infrastructure for, like, say, 4 separate buildings, single level garages, 60 spaces per garage? I'm sure there's a lot that entails that.
Yeah, there's a lot, and so it's where is the power source for each of those garages? Some are closer, some are further. I want to place the infrastructure in a centrally located spot in that area, so that's important. That might vary per garage. Also, how much growth do you want? Do you want to cover half the garage spaces, 100% of the garage spaces? Do you want to plan it for additional infrastructure to be easily added later? So do some of it now with a plan of adding more later, but also that be part of that design, which is very important, right? So you can't just assume you can grow later. You have to plan for growth now. And if you don't have that plan, it's not going to happen, or you're basically going to redo all the work again. I'm going to have to rip and replace everything out, and it's going to be incredibly more costly. So having the right plan for the now and the future is very important. So for me to give a cost on that, for many of the reasons like I just mentioned, is incredibly difficult. It's actually impossible. It's me just spouting out a number because there's so many factors that play into that. But ultimately, like I said, like I gave you that one instance, that high rise in Austin, where each person's paying $1,000 towards it. It's going to reimburse the HOA entirely, and then also have a fund left over on top of paying off that bill, let's say essentially initially, and then allow for future growth as more people come on board and want to get an electric vehicle charger. So it more than pays for itself.
Okay, we're about at time, but I want to just pop one more question in. So just curious about, will Smart Charge America manage the network commissioning process at startup for a large deployment, and also manage troubleshooting calls when chargers lose or experience signals issues and internet connectivity? So I thought that was a great question.
Yeah, that's honestly a very common issue, and often kind of oversight sometimes when it comes to this whole process, because internet connectivity is something that you don't really want to place on the HOA in a garage. When I work with new buildings, I encourage them to put cellular boosters, for instance, and or Wi-Fi connectivity in the entire parking area, not only just for car charging needs, but also just for safety. If someone's stuck in their car or gets hurt, they want to have cellular connectivity there to call 911 or call the authorities, call for help. And if you're in a deep garage with no connectivity, it's actually kind of dangerous to not have that. Certainly, you can't respond as quickly. So that's one of those things that I encourage new developers that I work with on new builds. But when it comes to existing, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to cellular connectivity, which can be intermittent. It can be, something that's also, it can have problems on the actual network provider side, as well as the manufacturer of the equipment. So it's certainly we've become very familiar with these hardware and software, and as well as cellular network providers, and we absolutely help with that the best we can, because sometimes it really comes down to the actual manufacturer of the hardware and them supporting it. So we're kind of at the mercy of them. Certainly, we're there to assist and help wherever we can, and certainly bring our experience to the table to help. Because ultimately, we want people charging. That's what we care about. We're not just install it and set it, forget it, see you later. We're in it for the long haul too. I want to install it now. I want to help you later. And we drive EVs ourselves. We get it. We know the challenges, and we want it to go smoothly.
Excellent, David. Thank you so much. And I will make sure to send out a link so that they can contact the website link so that they can contact if they want a consultation. So thank you again for your time. That's all the time we have now. I don't want to go too far over, but since this was recorded, once the video is uploaded to the YouTube channel, I will send the link out to everyone. And you can access this webinar along with other webinars in the series. So again, David, thank you so much for this information. We truly appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, have a great evening. Thank you.